handbag. Ancient Sumerians were more than familiar with handbags, or perhaps objects that modern people perceive as such.
No one was supposed to find this in a barren desert with no ruins, no records, and no history. A man picked up an object that should only exist in stone carvings. These handbags had appeared only as mysterious carvings or reliefs. They surfaced in Mesopotamia. It was small, solid, and unmistakably shaped by human hands. At first it looked meaningless. Then, scientists saw it. The shape matched a strange object carved into ancient Sumerian reliefs, always held by gods, never found in real life. Until now. When researchers looked closer, they realized this was not a symbol, and what happened next shocked them to the very bone. And they're carrying these things that people call handbags, but in reality, they're not handbags. In this instance, they're buckets. A find that should not exist. The man was not exploring ruins or following a map. Instead, he was moving through a stretch of desert that experts had written off decades ago. No cities were recorded there, and no trade routes passed through it. The area had no ancient rivers, no settlements, or any reason for history to have paused in that place. Archaeologists ignored regions like this because nothing was supposed to be found. The land was empty in the most final way possible, as if the past itself had decided to stay away. Even locals avoided it, not because of danger, but because there was simply nothing there. There were no stories or markers, just sand, stone, and a silence that felt heavy rather than peaceful. Yet as the man walked, the ground beneath him shifted from loose sand to a harder, compacted layer. It was the kind that formed only after long periods of stillness. That was when he noticed it. It was not sticking out clearly or calling attention to itself, yet it was wrong enough to interrupt his step. It was a rigid edge that was too straight and deliberate. Nature does not form clean lines like that in places with no structure to support them. At first, he assumed it was a piece of modern debris, something dropped or buried by chance. But as he brushed away the sand, the shape refused to become ordinary. More of it emerged slowly, resisting the ground as though it had been placed there with intention. The object had a flat base that allowed it to sit upright, a curved top that rose evenly, and a narrow arch connecting the sides. The arch was not decorative, as it was sized precisely for a human hand. It was not large or symbolic, but practical, balanced, and designed to be carried. The native Maui civilization also included a handbag-like shape in their religious carvings. The proportions were exact in a way that felt deeply unsettling, because nothing else around it shared that precision. The surface told its own story. Faint grooves ran along the sides, not random scratches, but repeated wear marks. The edges were smoothed down unevenly, as if fingers had gripped the same places again and again over a long period of time. This was not erosion from sandstorms or water. This was contact from handling and use. Whatever this object was, it had been picked up, moved, and relied on. And yet, it was sitting alone in a place where no one was ever supposed to have stood. That was when the feeling changed. The discovery stopped feeling curious and started feeling wrong. The shape triggered something immediate and uncomfortable in his mind. He had seen this before, not as an object, but as an image, and not in a museum case, but carved into stone thousands of years ago. The recognition came with a sense of dread rather than excitement, because the thing he remembered was never supposed to exist in physical form. Later, when he searched through images and academic papers, the match was undeniable. The object was present in ancient Sumerian reliefs and cylinder seals. Stone carvings showing gods, kings, and winged figures holding a strange, handbag-shaped object by its handle. The object in the man's hands matched those carvings in scale, shape, and proportion with disturbing accuracy. The flat base, the curved top, the handle placement, and even the slight asymmetry matched how it was depicted in ancient art. This was not an inspired replica, but the same object rendered in 3 dimensions, resting in a desert that had no right to contain it. In that moment, everything changed. Something had been placed there long ago, hidden where no one would think to look, waiting not to be discovered, but to remain forgotten. And scientists had to get to the bottom of what exactly it was. The icon scholars, always called a symbol. For thousands of years, the mysterious handbag appeared in Mesopotamian carvings, cylinder seals, and reliefs. And it acts like a handbag. As the old adage goes, it must be a handbag. But I'm here to tell you it wasn't, and I'm going to prove it to you in 3 minutes or less. Let's get to it. It was never held by ordinary figures. Kings, gods, and winged beings clutched it, their fingers wrapped carefully around its handle. The object's presence was deliberate, calculated, and associated with authority, judgment, or control. Its shape never changed, and every depiction showed the same proportions, the same curve, and the same grip. Scholars assumed it symbolized power, sacred knowledge, or divine authority, something abstract, untouchable, and safely confined to imagination. But the images were consistent across centuries. Every carving and every seal faithfully repeated the form. The precision was unsettling and was not an artistic variation. This was reference to something real. The figures were not imagining it, but recording it and reproducing it with geometric exactness. The icon's design spoke of control, of something that could be handled, lifted, and carried, something tangible. Even more disturbing was the fact that similar shapes appear across cultures, separated by oceans and millennia. Egypt, the Indus Valley, and Mesoamerica, which according to current knowledge had no contact with one another, produced strikingly similar symbols. Scholars dismiss these occurrences as a coincidence, assuming independent invention or shared metaphor. It was easier to ignore the implications than to confront them. The assumption that the handbag was purely symbolic allowed centuries of study to remain safe and academic. Debates revolved around meaning, context, and ritual, but never about physical reality. No one had seen one or held one. This made the object untouchable and safely locked in stone until the day it emerged from the desert. Suddenly, the symbol was no longer distant. It was 3-dimensional, resting in a place where no Sumerian city had ever been recorded. Every line, curve, and groove matched the carvings. This was not a variation or a rough interpretation. It was the same object. It had been shaped, handled, and left behind. Something long considered metaphor had become terrifyingly real. The implications were immediate and unavoidable. If the object was real, then the carvings were not symbolic exaggeration, but documentation. They were evidence of a practice, a function, a ritual, or a technology that humans had lost or been prevented from remembering. No longer could scholars hide behind abstraction. The object's existence demanded questions. How did it travel? Why was it preserved here? What did it once contain? And most frighteningly, why had it been left behind in a place where no one should have found it? Once the artifact entered a laboratory, the illusion of symbolism was shattered completely. The object could be measured, tested, and weighed, and the scientists would soon discover that this discovery carried consequences far darker than anyone had imagined. Proving it was ancient, Multiple cultures around the world have similar illustrations of handbag-like objects, which stroked curiosity and speculation. When the object first reached the lab, skepticism ran high. Such a discovery in a remote desert could easily be explained as modern tampering or a hoax. But as scientists examined it under high-powered microscopes, the reality became undeniable. The surface bore erosion patterns that could not have been manufactured. Tiny scratches, uneven wear, and microscopic abrasions ran across every surface. They were inconsistent, unpredictable, just the kind of subtle detail only centuries of handling and exposure could create. No modern forger could reproduce that randomness. Every line screamed of age. Material testing added another layer of impossibility. The clay was mixed with organic fibers in a method characteristic of early Sumerian artisans. Yet, these materials were not native to the desert where the object had been found. There was no known route, no trade network, or no civilization that could explain how such an artifact arrived in that barren, lifeless expanse. The anomaly itself was disturbing. This was a tangible link to a culture that supposedly existed thousands of miles and years away, sitting silently where it had no right to exist. Radioarbon dating of the fibers confirmed the worst-case scenario for established history. The object was not a clever replica, not a forgery, not even a misattributed relic. It dated back to the early Sumerian era, and that alone was enough to rattle scholars. The implication was immediate. An object made thousands of years ago had ended up far from its origin, surviving conditions no one would have predicted.
The object's existence demanded questions. How did it travel? Why was it preserved here? What did it once contain? And most frighteningly, why had it been left behind in a place where no one should have found it? Once the artifact entered a laboratory, the illusion of symbolism was shattered completely. The object could be measured, tested, and weighed. And the scientists would soon discover that this discovery carried consequences far darker than anyone had imagined, proving it was ancient. Multiple cultures around the world have similar illustrations of handbag-like objects, which stroked curiosity and speculation. When the object first reached the lab, skepticism ran high. Such a discovery in a remote desert could easily be explained as modern tampering or a hoax, but as scientists examined it under high-powered microscopes, the reality became undeniable. The surface bore erosion patterns that could not have been manufactured. Tiny scratches, uneven wear, and microscopic abrasions ran across every surface. They were inconsistent, unpredictable, just the kind of subtle detail only centuries of handling and exposure could create. No modern forger could reproduce that randomness. Every line screamed of age. Material testing added another layer of impossibility. The clay was mixed with organic fibers in a method characteristic of early Sumerian artisans. Yet these materials were not native to the desert where the object had been found. There was no known route, no trade network, or no civilization that could explain how such an artifact arrived in that barren, lifeless expanse. The anomaly itself was disturbing. This was a tangible link to a culture that supposedly existed thousands of miles and years away, sitting silently where it had no right to exist. Radioarbon dating of the fibers confirmed the worst-case scenario for established history. The object was not a clever replica, not a forgery, not even a misattributed relic. It dated back to the early Sumerian era, and that alone was enough to rattle scholars. The implication was immediate. An object made thousands of years ago had ended up far from its origin, surviving conditions no one would have predicted. The desert had preserved it perfectly, but also concealed it for centuries, leaving humans unaware of its existence until now. Toolmark analysis erased any lingering doubt about its authenticity. The carvings, grooves, and indentations showed unmistakable signs of hand carving with primitive stone implements. Pressure lines matched the careful work of an artisan with experience and intent. Every groove and chip aligned with known Sumerian techniques, yet the desert around it offered no explanation for its presence. This object was ancient, real, and deliberately crafted. By this stage, the consensus among the team was grim. The handbag was not only authentic, but it was also impossibly out of place. This implies that these bags are important objects, not everyday utensils. But if this is not your average bag, what might the bag have been used for? It undermined the timeline of human movement, cultural dissemination, and even trade. How could something so precisely Sumerian appear in a location where no Sumerians had ever been documented? What had been lost or hidden in plain sight for millennia? The artifact had moved from symbol to reality, from theory to undeniable evidence, and yet, proving it was ancient was only the beginning. The next question, one that would terrify researchers even more, was unavoidable. What did it contain? Why was it designed the way it was? And why had it been left in a place no one should have found? Once the researchers could peer inside, the object's secrets would begin to reveal themselves, and with them, a reality far darker than any had anticipated. Built to hold something, dark version. When the X-ray scans came back, the lab fell silent. Inside the seemingly simple handbag, researchers saw precisely carved cavities. These were not accidental gaps or ornamental hollows. Every chamber was shaped with intent, as if to cradle something both valuable and potentially dangerous. The symmetry and engineering left no room for doubt. The object had been designed to contain a specific substance, something the maker understood required careful containment. The density readings confirmed what no one wanted to admit. The handbag had once been far heavier than clay alone could account for. Whatever had been inside it was concentrated, dense, and purposeful. This was not a storage vessel for grain, seeds, or casual goods. It was meant for a substance that demanded weight management, stability, and protection. The precision with which the internal walls were reinforced spoke to an understanding of stress distribution. This meant knowledge of physics and material strength that seemed centuries ahead of anything expected from early Mesopotamian artisans. At the same time, no cracks, no fractures, or signs of collapse were found. The structure was pristine and built to endure. These chambers were original, not the product of erosion or later modification. Someone had taken care to ensure that whatever was inside would remain secure, undisturbed, and intact over time. The object had survived millennia, not by accident, but because it had been designed to survive. Every detail suggested deliberate intent, from the curve of the handle, the alignment of the walls, and the uniformity of internal space. It was a tool built for a purpose, not a symbol meant for a display. The handbag had never been intended to sit on a shelf. It had been carried, handled, and deployed in some function that demanded precision and secrecy. The realization was simple and terrifying. This was not a ceremonial prop. It was a working object, a container for something that required control, knowledge, and careful handling. The room grew tense as researchers debated the implications. If it was designed to hold something this carefully, what was it? Something valuable? Dangerous? Something forbidden? Every possibility carried weight, and none were comforting. The handbag's original function had been deliberately hidden, preserved behind layers of time, sand, and stone until now. And whatever it contained, it had been important enough to justify centuries of meticulous craftsmanship and engineering. In that moment, the object stopped being a curiosity. This was not a harmless artifact, but a deliberate functional tool from a civilization capable of controlled high-risk operations. Its discovery raised immediate questions about knowledge and technology that had been intentionally kept secret, forgotten, or erased from history. When researchers peered into the substance it once carried, the object's secrets crossed a line from unsettling to dangerous, revealing a reality no one had anticipated. Evidence of dangerous contents, the terrifying truth inside. When the first chemical analyses returned, the lab fell into stunned silence. Inside the Sumerian handbag's internal chambers, researchers discovered a mercury organic compound that no modern laboratory could fully replicate. This was not a trace, contaminant, or accidental residue. The mixture behaved unpredictably, shifting viscosity in seconds when exposed to light, heat, or air. It reacted as if alive, and responding to conditions with a precision that suggested deliberate design. From the first moment, it was clear this was no ordinary substance. It had been engineered for a purpose, and a dangerous one at that. Microscopic examination revealed another shocking detail. This was pollen from a plant species long believed extinct with unique biochemical properties. Its structure indicated adaptations capable of producing potent neuroactive effects. This was not a casual additive, as it had been carefully harvested, processed, and preserved. Someone in the ancient world had gone to great lengths to cultivate a psychoactive or neurotoxic agent, concentrating it to levels no ordinary person could survive exposure to. The combination of mercury and rare plant compounds suggested control over chemical reactions far beyond anything historians imagined. Toxicologists studying the residues noted chemical signatures indicating the mixture could affect the nervous system, producing hallucinations, paralysis, or sudden behavioral shifts. The handbag's walls bore repeated traces of the compound, showing it had been stored, emptied, and refilled many times. This was no ceremonial offering or symbolic storage. It had been an operational tool designed for repeated use, handled only by individuals with intimate knowledge of its dangers. The thought alone sent chills through the team. These people were manipulating volatile neurochemicals in an era most textbooks claimed lacked such understanding. The handbag itself revealed why. X-ray imaging had already confirmed its internal chambers were carefully engineered to distribute weight, prevent cracking, and withstand stress. Now, with chemical evidence in hand, the reasoning became terrifyingly clear. The object was designed to contain something inherently unstable, something that could kill or if released accidentally. Even in its degraded centuries-old state, the substance reacted violently to heat or moisture. Any ancient handler would have needed skill, knowledge, and extreme caution. Researchers began piecing together the implications. The repeated handling indicated systematic use, almost like a portable kit for controlled administration. Its presence in ancient carvings, always held by gods or rulers, suddenly made sense. Only those of elite rank or priestly authority would have been entrusted with such dangerous power. The artifact was not symbolic, but a working tool of chemical control. This was a device for harnessing volatile compounds with precision. The combined presence of mercury, extinct pollen, and neuroactive agents left an unshakable conclusion. This was a tool for a substance capable of harming, controlling, or killing. The discovery forced the team to confront a truth darker than any academic theory. This artifact represented dangerous knowledge lost to time and deliberately restricted to a select few. With the contents revealed, historians faced a chilling question. Why was such a potent, hazardous tool so carefully hidden in plain sight? And what does it tell us about the lost sophistication of ancient civilizations? A tool hidden behind art, dark inversion. With the contents confirmed, every assumption about ancient art, religion, and hierarchy shifted in an instant. The object was a literal tool designed to contain something volatile, toxic, and potentially lethal. What had long been studied as iconography was actually a depiction of restricted technology. The carvings were not exaggerations of power, but instructions, warnings, and status markers for those entrusted with deadly knowledge. Its presence in the hands of gods, kings, and winged figures suddenly made sense. Authority was not merely symbolic, it depended on the ability to wield what this object contained. The divine imagery was a veil over real operational control. The absence of other surviving examples became chillingly logical. These weren't objects to discard, as any container that once held such a compound would be reclaimed, deconstructed, or destroyed to prevent misuse. The very scarcity of physical examples was no accident. It suggested deliberate suppression in a conscious effort to erase dangerous knowledge from history. What the hiker unearthed in the desert was not a lost artifact, but a breach of containment where something forbidden had been left exposed. Ancient texts referencing sacred mixtures or those permitted to touch the vessel took on an entirely new dimension. For generations, these phrases had been read metaphorically. Now they could be instructions, warnings, or technical descriptions encoded in religious language. Every reference to divine handling, ritual purification, or secret access may have been a literal directive to prevent disaster. What seemed allegorical was actually protocol. Even the carvings themselves took on a menacing precision. The rigid posture, the solemn presentation of the handbag, and the controlled grip were not artistic choices. The iconography functioned as a form of encoded training or rule setting designed to survive generations, without exposing the lethal truth to the uninitiated. The implications were profound and disturbing. The ancients were not only crafting symbols, but managing powerful, restricted tools. They encoded chemical and technological knowledge within art, carefully controlling access, influence, and survival. What had been dismissed as mythology, symbolism, or decoration was in fact a record of dangerous competence and knowledge that humans were not meant to rediscover lightly. This revelation forced historians and scientists to confront a terrifying question. If this tool existed, what other suppressed technologies or controlled substances might lie hidden, concealed in plain sight, waiting to be unearthed? Why this changes history? The terrifying implications of a real Sumerian handbag. The discovery of the Sumerian handbag forces a reckoning with the past that historians, archaeologists, and scientists could scarcely imagine. For the first time, there is physical proof that ancient civilizations possessed chemical knowledge capable of producing unstable, toxic, and neurologically active substances that modern laboratories can barely handle safely. The assumption that early societies relied solely on simple tools, ceremonial materials, or symbolic gestures is shattered. These people manipulated volatile chemistry with precision, control, and purpose. The implications of such expertise are terrifying. Control over these substances would have been an immense form of power. Elite Sumerian priests or rulers depicted clutching the handbag in carvings